The pen rolled off the edge of the table and hit the floor with a small, sharp click. That was the first thing I noticed, not the sound before it, not the way Ambassador Delara Chen had stopped speaking mid-sentence, not the stillness that had dropped over the chamber like a curtain, just my pen, rolling, stopping against the leg of the Veth delegation's chair. I am Mara Voss, Senior Diplomatic Attaché to the Human Mission at the Galactic Conclave, former Naval Judge Advocate, 11 years of service across 4 star systems, 9 treaty negotiations, and more depositions than I can count. I have sat in rooms where civilizations argued over the ownership of entire moons. I have kept my face still through things that would make most people walk out the door. I did not keep my face still when Chen fell. She did not fall the way people fall in vids. There was no drama, no reaching out, no final words. She was speaking something about revised transit fees through the outer lanes, and then she was not speaking. And then she was not standing. She was in her chair, and then she was not in her chair, and the sound I had heard was not the pen at all. It had come before the pen. It had come from her. I was on my feet before I understood why. The chamber held 23 delegations. 47 species sat in that room on any given session day, represented by their chosen diplomats and aides and silent observers pressed into the gallery above. The Galactic Conclave had been in continuous operation for 600 years. In 600 years, no sitting ambassador had ever died on the floor of that chamber. The Veth delegation did not move. That was what I noticed next. The Cathori to our left rose immediately. The Dravosi behind us made a sound like grinding stone, which I later learned was their expression of alarm. 3 human medical staff pushed through the side doors within 90 seconds. Every delegation in that room showed some form of reaction. The Veth sat still as sculpture. Their ambassador, a tall figure, dark as deep space, with joints that bent in directions I had spent 3 years training myself not to stare at, watched Chen being lowered to the floor by our staff. He watched without expression, without the subtle shift in posture that every species, in my experience, makes when something unexpected happens. He had not been surprised. I stood at the human delegation table and looked at him. He looked back at me. In that look, held for no more than 4 seconds, I understood something that took another 6 hours to confirm in words. He said nothing. His aide leaned forward and spoke a single phrase in formal Veth register. I had a translation bead in my left ear. It processed the phrase, cross-referenced it against 2 cultural databases, and delivered the result in a flat tone that somehow made it worse. A debt carried forward has been settled in the manner of our ancestors. I heard it. I filed it in the part of my brain that keeps working when the rest of it has gone somewhere quiet and cold. Our medical lead, a young man named Owen Graves who had been with the mission for 8 months and had never been in a situation like this in his life, looked up at me from the floor. His face asked a question he could not say out loud. I answered it without moving. "Call it," I said. He did. Delara Chen, Ambassador Plenipotentiary of the Human Mission to the Galactic Conclave, 61 years old, 23 years of interstellar service, decorated twice by the UN Council. The woman who had personally negotiated the Cathori Agricultural Compact, the Dravosi Corridor Agreement, and the Outer Lane Transit Framework that was still, as of this morning, generating 18% of Earth's off-world trade revenue. Gone, on the floor of a room where civilizations argued over moon tariffs. I turned to the chamber. 23 delegations, 47 species. The gallery above so quiet I could hear the environmental system cycling air through the vents. "This session is adjourned," I said. "Earth will respond through appropriate channels." My voice was steady. I had no idea how. The Veth ambassador rose. He spoke again. His aide did not translate. I did not ask for a translation. I held his gaze for 3 full seconds and then I looked away. Not because I was rattled, because I was already thinking, and looking at him was using space in my head that I needed for other things. I picked up my pen from the floor. I do not know why I picked up the pen. I have thought about it since. I think the answer is that my hands needed something to do, and my hands chose that, and I have carried that pen in my breast pocket every day since without entirely meaning to. The session cleared in segments. The human delegation moved in a tight group. Owen Graves handled the medical coordination. Our security lead, a quiet man named Carl Holt who had been with the mission for 9 years and had the demeanor of someone who had seen worse and hoped never to again, moved our staff out through the side corridor. I stayed until the room was nearly empty. I walked the perimeter once. I counted the floor tiles. 47. I counted them again. 47. I sent the first communication to Earth at 3 in the morning station time. Admiral Louis Reyes, head of the UN Strategic Command, picked up on the second ring. He was not asleep. I knew he would not be asleep. Word moved fast through certain channels. They killed her, I said. I know, he said. Tell me we have options. He was quiet 3 full seconds. I counted those too. 3 seconds from Louis Reyes, who had spent 30 years in rooms where people argued about war, meant that the options existed, that they were real, that they were not the kind of options anyone wanted to say out loud over an open channel at 3 in the morning. Come home first, he said. Come home and we'll talk. I looked at the pen in my hand. I thought about the way Chen had sounded mid-sentence talking about transit fees, the absolute ordinary mundanity of the last thing she ever said. I thought about the Veth ambassador's stillness, the premeditation in it, the patience. No, I said, brief me now. There was another pause, shorter this time. Mara, he said. Brief me now, Admiral. He did. By the time the sun rose over the station's artificial horizon, I knew 3 things. The first was that Dilara Chen had been killed deliberately, by a method the Veth called ancestral justice, over a trade clause she had written 2 years ago in an agricultural negotiation that no one outside of 3 departments had ever paid much attention to. The second was that the Galactic Conclave, when informed, would likely extend formal regrets, recommend mediation, and suggest Earth accept a reparations package calibrated to make the situation go away quietly. The third was that Earth was not going to do that. I did not know yet what Earth was going to do instead. I knew only that Reyes had been awake at 3 in the morning, had picked up on the second ring, and had paused for 3 seconds before answering a question about options. In 11 years of diplomacy, I had learned one thing above all others. The pause is where the truth lives. I put the pen back in my pocket. I started writing notes. Outside the viewport, the conclave station turned slowly against the dark, and the stars held their positions, patient and indifferent as they always had. They did not know yet what was coming. None of them did. The shuttle home took 9 hours. I spent 7 of them reading. Not reports, not diplomatic summaries or official condolence messages from the 31 species that had already transmitted formal expressions of sorrow to the human mission. Those could wait. I read Chen's files. The personal archive she kept on the mission server, annotated documents, margin notes, half-finished memos to herself that she had never sent to anyone. The kind of record a person keeps when they are thinking out loud and trusting no one but the page. She had been brilliant. I knew that. Everyone knew that. But brilliance in a diplomat looks like patience from the outside, and patience is easy to underestimate. Reading her files was like watching a very long, very quiet chess game being played by someone who had planned 12 moves ahead while everyone else was still counting their pieces. I found the note in a document dated 2 years ago, a margin annotation on a copy of the Galactic Conclave Founding Compact. Section 9, Article 4. She had written 3 words next to it in her small, precise handwriting. In case of emergency. I read the article. I read it again. I put my reader down and looked at the viewport for a while. Outside, the stars moved slowly past as the shuttle turned on its approach vector. She had found something old and unguarded. sitting in plain sight in a document that had been written 600 years ago by species who had never imagined a junior member would read it closely enough to matter. I put the reader in my bag. I looked out at the stars. I thought about the word emergency and whether what had happened in that chamber qualified. I decided it did. Earth looked the way it always looks from approach: blue, patient, unremarkable if you did not know it. The kind of planet that a passing species might catalog, note as inhabited, and file under developing, no immediate strategic value. Many species had done exactly that over the centuries. Many species had moved on. They had not paid close attention. Reyes met me at the transit hub himself. He was a compact man, 60 years old, with the particular stillness of someone who had commanded large operations and learned that stillness was its own form of authority. He shook my hand. He looked at my face and did not ask how I was doing. I respected him for that. We walked to a secured briefing room on the 4th level. No aides, no staff. 2 chairs, a table, a display screen, and a pitcher of water I poured myself a glass from and then did not drink. "Start with what you know," he said. I told him about the chamber, about the Veth ambassador's stillness, about the aide's phrase and the translation bead rendering it in that flat, patient voice, about counting the floor tiles. I told him all of it in order without editorializing, the way I had been trained to debrief. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The Conclave's position," he said, "is that the Veth acted within what they're calling ancestral precedent. There's a clause in the Veth clan charter, predating their Conclave membership, that allows for what they're calling debt resolution. The argument is that Chen's agricultural negotiation 2 years ago broke a Veth clan trade agreement that predated the Outer Lane Compact. They're saying it was legally permissible under their own cultural law." I looked at the water in my glass. "Soybean tariffs," I said. "Close enough. She died over a crop yield agreement." The Veth would say she died over a point of honor. "The Veth," I said, "can hold that position." Reyes almost smiled. He reached forward and activated the display. A star map appeared. I recognized the conclave region, the major transit lanes, the territorial boundaries of the elder species. Then he adjusted the display, and a second layer appeared over it. I did not recognize this layer. I leaned forward. 37 points of light, positioned in deep space off the major lanes, in the dark between territories that no species cared to monitor because nothing of value had ever been found there. No station markers, no registry designations, no flags. "What am I looking at?" I said. "What we've been building," Reyes said, "for 11 years. He told me all of it in the same flat, sequential way I had briefed him, and I sat in my chair and listened and did not interrupt. When he finished, I was quiet for a long time. I am not a military person. I understand military logic, the way any diplomat must, the way you understand the rules of a game you are not playing but must always account for. But I had spent 11 years in a world where power was expressed through language, through clauses and subarticles and negotiated frameworks, through patience and precision and the long, slow architecture of agreements. What Reyes was describing was not that. It was patient in its way. It had been built slowly, carefully, in the gaps between rules that had been written by species who assumed junior members would not read the fine print. But it was not diplomacy. It was the thing that exists behind diplomacy, the thing that gives diplomacy its weight. Humanity had spent 40 years in the galactic conclave being polite. We had not spent those 40 years being still. "The elder species," I said, "have been monitoring our political development." "Closely," Reyes said. "They did not monitor our engineering development. They didn't think they needed to." I looked at the 37 points of light on the map, a fleet that did not appear in any registry. Technology assembled from 6 different species, improved upon, adapted, made into something that had no direct precedent in any conclave defense catalog. Built quietly in the dark, by a species that everyone in the galaxy had categorized as developing. "Does this violate any conclave statute?" I said. "We had 3 legal teams review it over the course of 8 years, Reyes said. The answer, consistently, was no. The elder species wrote the defense and armament statutes to regulate declared military infrastructure. They did not write language covering undeclared development conducted in non-territorial space, because they did not believe any junior member had the industrial capacity to conduct it. They were wrong. They were not paying attention. I thought about Chen's margin note. In case of emergency. I thought about the way she had spoken in that chamber, right up until the moment she stopped, the absolute calm of her, the patience of someone who has been building something for a very long time and trusts the foundation. "She knew," I said, "didn't she?" Reyes did not answer immediately. "She knew about the fleet. She was one of 4 civilians who had been briefed," he said. "She requested the briefing herself 3 years ago. She wanted to understand what was behind her work, what gave her words weight." I sat with that for a moment. Chen, sitting in that chamber every day, knowing, negotiating with patience and precision, knowing, writing a margin note in a 600-year-old document and filing it under in case of emergency, knowing. She had been building towards something, a contingency she hoped she would never need. The Veth had forced her hand, posthumously. "You need me to go back," I said. "You're the ranking human official at the conclave," Reyes said. "You're the one who adjourned the session. When Earth responds, it has to be you in that room." "What am I delivering?" He reached into the file on the table. He slid a document toward me, 7 pages. I read all of it, twice. When I finished, I set it down and looked at the water I still had not drunk. "This is going to change things," I said. "Yes," he said. "Permanently. That's the intention." I looked at the map again. 37 points of light in the dark. Behind me, in another wing of this building, 12 of Chen's former staff had already submitted requests to be reassigned to my mission. I had been told this an hour ago by my coordinator. I had not yet responded. I was responding now, internally, in the way you respond to things before you say them out loud. They wanted to finish what she had started. So did I. "I need one thing before I go back," I said. "Name it." "I need to know what she found in the founding compact, Article 9. I need to know if it holds the way she thought it did." Reyes looked at me carefully. "You found her note." I read her files on the way home, all of them. He was quiet for a moment. Then he opened a second file on the display, a legal analysis dated 18 months ago with 4 names at the top. Senior Counsel, UN Galactic Legal Division, 112 pages. The conclusion was on the final page, 3 sentences. I read them. I closed the file. I picked up the pen from my pocket and set it on the table and looked at it. "All right," I said, "I'll go back." The shuttle back to the conclave station left at dawn the next morning. I boarded it with 12 people and a document I had read so many times I could recite it from memory. The stars outside the viewport were the same stars, patient, indifferent, holding their positions in the dark. They were about to become relevant to a conversation they had not known was happening. I thought about Chen the whole way. About the kind of person who plans 12 moves ahead and then teaches the person beside her to do the same. About margin notes and emergency clauses and soybean tariffs and a pen rolling across a chamber floor. About what it costs to be the person who finishes someone else's work. About whether I was ready. The shuttle moved through the dark. Behind it, in positions the galaxy did not yet know existed, 37 points of light held formation. I decided I was ready. I walked into the chamber alone. No legal team. No aides. Carl Holt and his security staff were positioned outside the doors, which was standard protocol for any senior diplomat entering a full session. But inside the chamber I was one person carrying one document, and the 14 steps from the entrance to the human delegation table felt longer than any 14 steps I had taken in my life. The session had been called as an extraordinary plenary. All 47 member species in attendance. The gallery above was full for the first time in 3 years. Word had moved through the conclave station quickly. Humanity had requested the floor. Humanity had something to say, and everyone wanted to see what the expression on a junior member's face looked like when they finally accepted what the galaxy was offering them. I sat down. I placed the document on the table in front of me. I placed the pen beside it. The Veth delegation was in their seats. Their ambassador, whose name in formal register took 40 seconds to pronounce, and whom I had decided to call nothing at all in my own head, was composed. Still, his aide sat to his left. Behind them, 3 junior members of their delegation occupied the rear row. In the third seat of that rear row, a young Veth delegate sat with his hands folded and his posture careful. He was the one who had visited my temporary office 2 days ago, carrying an apology no one had authorized him to deliver. He had drunk water from a glass I had given him. He had been terrified. He was less terrified now. He met my eyes for a moment when I sat down. He looked away first. The session chair, a Kethori diplomat named Sav Andal, who had held that role for 30 years and managed every procedural crisis in that time with the same expression of patient exhaustion, called the plenary to order. He acknowledged Earth's request for the floor. He granted it in the formal language of the founding compact, as was required, and he said my name and my title in both English and the common conclave tongue. I stood up. "Thank you," I said. I did not open the document. I had memorized every word. 43 days ago, in this chamber, Ambassador Delara Chen was killed during a session of the Galactic Conclave. The delegation responsible has confirmed the action and described it as the resolution of a debt under ancestral Veth custom. Multiple elder species have since communicated to Earth, through various channels, that this action falls within the boundaries of what the Conclave recognizes as internal cultural practice. I paused, not for effect, because the next sentence needed its own space. Earth does not recognize that position. The chamber was quiet, not the polite quiet of a body waiting for a speaker to continue, the other kind, the kind that has weight. I continued. Earth is not filing a protest. Earth is not requesting mediation. Earth is not seeking a reparations framework. Earth is invoking Article 9 of the Galactic Conclave Founding Compact, the provision for extraordinary diplomatic harm, which grants the aggrieved party the right to formally restructure the conclave standing of the party responsible for the harm. This includes trade rights, transit lane access, colonial charter status, and membership voting privileges. The restructuring period under Article 9 is 20 galactic standard years. I let that land. The Veth ambassador's aide leaned toward him immediately. I watched the ambassador's head tilt slightly to the left as he listened. It was the first movement he had made since the session opened. Around the chamber, the reaction spread outward from the Veth delegation like something dropped into still water. The Kethori representatives exchanged a look. The Dravosi elder leaned forward in his seat. In the gallery above, I could hear the low, overlapping sounds of translation systems, processing what I had just said and feeding it to listeners who were now, for the first time in this plenary, paying a different kind of attention. 3 delegations moved to table the session simultaneously. They all spoke at once. Sav Andal raised his hand and silence fell, because 30 years of running this chamber had given him that particular authority. "The motion to table requires a majority vote," he said. "Do we have a motion and a second?" The Dravosi elder raised his hand. The motion was on the floor. "A second," said Sav Andal. The room held still. 12 seconds passed. I counted them. No one seconded the motion. Because seconding a motion to table required a delegate to publicly, formally, on the session record, align themselves against Earth's invocation of a provision of the founding compact. And no one in that room, not one of the 47 species represented, wanted that on their record. Not today. not when they did not yet know the full shape of what was happening. The motion fails for lack of a second, Sav Andal said. He looked at me. The floor remains with the human mission. I had 2 sentences left. Earth has submitted the formal Article 9 filing to the Compact Registry. It has been received and timestamped. A copy has been transmitted to every member delegation. The filing is attached to the record of this session and is effective immediately. I sat down. For 4 seconds, nothing happened. Then every screen in the chamber changed. Every display surface, every navigation panel at every delegation table, the large informational screens on all 4 walls of the chamber, the data terminals in the gallery, they did not go dark, they did not flicker. They simply, all at once, without warning, showed the same image. A fleet in formation. 37 vessels, positioned in a configuration that any military analyst in any species would immediately recognize as a holding pattern rather than an attack position. Not aggressive, not advancing, simply present, undeniable, real. Positioned around the Veth homeworld. The coordinates on the display were precise. The formation was clearly visible from the long-range imagery the display was drawing from. The fleet was not in Veth territorial space. It was in the unclaimed corridor adjacent to it, 3 light minutes from the outer planetary boundary. Legal, technically. Perfectly, carefully, intentionally legal. The Veth ambassador made a sound. I had no translation for it. My translation bead processed it for 2 full seconds and returned nothing. In 4 years of working alongside Veth diplomats, I had never heard a Veth make a sound that a translation bead could not render into something. The bead gave up and stayed silent. I decided the sound was the thing a species makes when it understands something it cannot undo. 3 delegations spoke at once. Sav Andal let them speak. He did not call for order. He was reading his own display, which now showed the Article 9 filing in full, and his expression was one I had never seen on a Kethori face before. From the gallery, I heard the unmistakable sound of a Dravosi observer laughing. It was not a kind laugh, but it was genuine. The Veth ambassador gathered himself. He spoke in formal Veth register, and this time his aide translated without being asked. The human mission's invocation of Article 9 is unprecedented. The provision has not been activated in the Compact's 600-year history. Earth cannot demonstrate that the language was intended to cover a situation of this nature. I looked at the ambassador directly. Respect, I said. The language of Article 9 does not require intent from the drafters. It requires the satisfaction of 3 conditions: an ambassador in active session, an action resulting in loss of life by a member delegation, and a formal invocation by the aggrieved party within 90 galactic standard days. All 3 conditions are satisfied. The Compact does not require the elder species to have imagined a scenario in order for that scenario to fall within their own written law. There was a pause. This was planned, the ambassador said. No, I said, this was found, there is a difference. He looked at the display, at the fleet, at the coordinates that put 37 human vessels 3 light minutes from his homeworld. You would not fire on our world, he said. We have not fired on anyone, I said. We are simply present, as is our right, in non-territorial space, under the same compact whose protections you relied on when you killed our ambassador. I kept my voice even, not cold, even, the way Chen had taught me in 30 different briefing rooms over 6 years. Even is more dangerous than cold. Cold is emotion, even is decision. The Veth ambassador looked at me for a long time. I held the look. I did not count seconds. I did not look away. I had picked up my pen from the table and was holding it in my left hand, and I was not aware of doing that until after. Around us, the chamber had found a new kind of quiet. Not the quiet of waiting, the quiet of recalibration, of 47 species simultaneously revising assumptions they had held for decades. Junior member. Developing. No immediate strategic value. In the gallery, I could see 4 delegations that had already pulled up their own copies of the Article 9 filing, and were reading it with an attention they had never previously given to the founding compact. I recognized the posture. It was the posture of people who were looking for something they could use. I had expected that. Chen had expected that. The filing, as written, was constructed to be clear enough to be unambiguous and broad enough to be instructive. A door, not just for Earth, but for every junior member who had ever been told that the compact's older provisions were ceremonial. They were not ceremonial. They had simply been waiting for someone to read them. Sav Andal called for a procedural recess, 45 minutes. Standard protocol when a session reached an impasse that required member delegations to consult with their home governments. It was an act of mercy toward the room, and I accepted it as such. I gathered my document. I picked up my pen. Carl Holt met me at the side door and walked with me to the corridor outside, and for 30 steps neither of us said anything. "How did they take it?" he said. I thought about the sound the Veth ambassador had made, the one the translation bead could not process. "They understood it," I said. "That's not what I asked." "I know." I stopped walking. I stood in the corridor and looked at the wall and thought about Chen reading a 600-year-old document and writing 3 words in the margin, and filing it away for the emergency that she had hoped would never come and that had come anyway, in the worst possible way. I thought about the Veth ambassador's face when the screens changed, when the fleet appeared, when 40 years of assumption collapsed in a single session because one human diplomat had read the fine print. I thought about Chen, who had read it first. "They'll push back through official channels," I said. "They'll argue procedure. They'll try to build a coalition in the next 72 hours. They won't find one." "How do you know?" "Because 4 delegations in the gallery were already reading the filing when I left the room," I said. "They weren't reading it to help the Veth. They were reading it to understand what they could do with it themselves." Carl was quiet for a moment. "You opened something." "Chen opened it," I said. "I just walked through the door she left." I put the pen back in my pocket. Down the corridor, the procedural recess was counting down. In 45 minutes I would walk back into that chamber, and the Veth would make a formal counterargument, and I would respond to every point with the precision I had spent 11 years building. And at the end of it, the Article 9 filing would remain on the record because it was unimpeachably correct, and everyone in that room knew it. The galaxy was going to change tonight. I was not sure yet what it would look like on the other side of that change. I was not sure anyone was. But the recess was ending. There was work to do. There was always work to do. Chen had told me that in a briefing room on Earth 6 years ago, on the first morning I had worked for her. She had said it the way people say things that are obvious and important at the same time, as if the work itself was the point, as if the doing of it was not separate from the meaning of it but the same thing entirely. I walked back toward the chamber. The first 20 hours after the session ended were the most chaotic 20 hours in conclave history. I know that is a claim that sounds dramatic when you say it out loud, but the conclave's own archivists confirmed it later in a report that took them 8 months to compile. They measured it by the volume of emergency communications logged through official channels, the number of bilateral meetings requested outside of scheduled session time, the number of formal protests filed by member species who were not directly involved in the Article 9 proceeding, but felt strongly enough about what had happened to go on record anyway. By every metric they used, those first 20 hours exceeded the Keth secession, the Dravosi War Declaration, and the infamous session of 2244, where 3 elder species simultaneously attempted to revise the founding compact and were, politely but firmly, stopped. I was awake for all 20 hours. I drank a great deal of coffee and took exactly no comfort from the fact that things were going to plan. The plan had been Chen's in its architecture. Reyes had built the fleet. The legal team had confirmed the filing. But the sequence, the fleet revealed at the moment of maximum attention, the filing already submitted before the session opened. The door opened wide enough for junior members to recognize and walk through. That sequence was the structure Chen had been constructing for 3 years. It was in her notes, in her margin annotations, in the quiet, patient thinking of someone who understood that the best time to prepare for an emergency is before it arrives. She had prepared for this one without knowing exactly what form it would take. She had only known, with the certainty of someone who had spent 23 years reading the galaxy's political currents, that a moment would come when humanity needed something more than good arguments. She had made sure we would have it. By hour 3, 4 junior member species had formally communicated their support for Earth's Article 9 invocation. Not because they had coordinated with us in advance, because they had not, but because they had read the filing in the gallery, understood what it meant, and decided that the moment Earth had created was also a moment they could use. The conclave had always been structured in favor of the elder species, not through any law that said so explicitly, but through the accumulation of 600 years of precedent, custom, and assumption. Junior members participated. They were welcome to participate. They simply did not, in practice, move the larger pieces. The larger pieces belonged to the species that had been here longest, who had written the original framework, who understood its architecture the way you understand a house you have lived in for generations. What Chen had found in Article 9 was not just a provision that applied to this specific situation. It was evidence that the house had rooms the current owners had forgotten about, rooms with doors, rooms with furniture still in them, waiting. Once 4 junior members had read the filing and understood that, they began looking for their own rooms. I was in my temporary office at hour 4 when Owen Graves, who had become in the weeks since Chen's death something between a coordinator and a steadying presence, told me that the Dravosi elder had requested a private meeting. The Dravosi are one of the 3 elder species. They have been in the conclave for the full 600 years. They are large, slow-moving, and possessed of a patience that makes human institutional patience look like impatience. They do not request private meetings with junior members. It is not that they are prohibited from doing so. It is simply not something they do. I said yes. The Dravosi elder's name was something I could not pronounce, and he had offered me a shortened form years ago that translated approximately as one who has seen previous arrangements. I called him Sen, which was as close as my vocal range could manage, and he had accepted this with the equanimity of someone who had been hearing approximations of his name from junior species for longer than my species had possessed interstellar travel. He came to my office himself. No aide. He sat in the chair across from my desk, which was not quite large enough for him, but he arranged himself in it without complaint, and he looked at me with the particular attention of someone choosing their words across a very long distance. The Veth acted improperly, he said. Yes, I said. The elder species failed to prevent it. Yes. This is not a comfortable position for us to occupy. I looked at him carefully. Is that an apology, Sen? He was quiet for a moment. It is an acknowledgement. I'll take it. He settled further into the inadequate chair. What you have done with Article 9 is technically correct. Our legal scholars confirmed this within 2 hours of the session ending. The provision is valid. The filing is valid. Earth's position is legally unimpeachable. Yes. However, he said, and the word carried the weight of 600 years of galactic seniority, technically correct and strategically stable are not the same thing. You have created a situation that will destabilize the conclave's existing framework for some years. The existing framework, I said, allowed an ambassador to be killed in session and characterized it as cultural practice. Yes, he said. Then the existing framework needed destabilizing. He looked at me for a long time. The Dravosi have a way of looking at things that makes you feel examined rather than observed, like a geological survey rather than a glance. I held still under it. Chen taught you well, he said. I did not answer immediately. I put my pen down on the desk and looked at it. She taught me everything, I said, everything worth knowing. She would have handled this differently, he said, more slowly, more quietly. She would have had more time, I said. I was working with what I had. He made a sound that I recognized, after 3 years, as Dravosi agreement. Not enthusiastic agreement. The kind of agreement you give when you believe someone is correct and wish they were not. The VETH will comply with the Article 9 framework, he said. They have no legal option otherwise, but they will be difficult about it. Their transit lane restructuring alone will take 18 months of negotiation. I have good negotiators, I said. You have trained them. I had a good teacher. He rose from the chair slowly and adjusted his posture with the careful dignity of someone navigating a room built for smaller beings. He looked at me once more at the door. The junior members who are reading the filing, he said, the ones who are looking for their own provisions. Yes, we will be watching that. I assumed you would be, I said. I want you to watch it. I want you to see what happens when junior members read the documents that govern their membership and understand what they actually say. He was quiet. That is not a threat, Sen, I said. It is an observation. The provisions were written by the elder species. If they contain things that change the balance of power, that is the choice the drafters made 600 years ago. We are simply reading what was written. He left without responding, but at the door, before he turned the corner, he made a sound I recognized as acknowledgement, not the disagreeing kind this time. By hour 8, the first wave of conclave political realignment had begun to take visible shape. 4 junior species had moved from informal support to formal co-signatory status on a secondary brief that Earth's legal team had anticipated and prepared for in advance. 3 mid-tier species that had historically maintained neutrality in any conflict involving elder members issued carefully worded statements affirming the validity of the Article 9 process. The statements were cautious, diplomatic, full of qualifications. They were also, each of them, a choice. By hour 12, the VETH's attempt to build a blocking coalition had failed. They had contacted 11 member species. 7 had declined to participate. 3 had not responded. 1 had responded, transmitted a brief communication through secure channels to Earth's mission office. It was 1 sentence. We read the filing too. That sentence, sent by a species that had been in the conclave for 200 years and had never once publicly opposed an elder member decision, meant something specific and significant. Owen Graves brought it to me and watched my face when I read it. Is that good? He said. Yes, I said. How good? The kind of good, I said, that takes a long time to fully understand. The economic dimensions of the Article 9 restructuring began to materialize at hour 14. Earth's trade negotiators had been preparing for 3 months. They moved through the conclave station the way people move when they have been underestimated for a long time and have excellent memory, and are finally doing the thing they have been quietly preparing to do. 3 major transit lanes that ran through VETH-adjacent space were reclassified under the Article 9 framework. The reclassification was not punitive. It was precise. It targeted the specific infrastructure that the VETH used to maintain economic leverage over 4 junior members in their quadrant. Those 4 junior members immediately recognized what had happened. Their mission offices sent communications to my office that ranged from formal appreciation to something 1 junior diplomat, younger than Owen Graves, sent as a personal message at 3 in the morning. It was 2 words. Thank you. I kept that one. I am not sure why. I put it in the same folder where I kept Chen's margin notes and the Article 9 legal analysis and the record of the session where she had been talking about transit fees and then stopped. By hour 18, 3 bilateral negotiation requests had come in from elder species. Not the VETH. The others. The ones watching. The ones who had spent 40 years categorizing humanity as developing and were now, quietly and without any public acknowledgement, revising their assessments. I took the first meeting myself. The second I assigned to a woman on my team named Patricia Wells, who had been with the human mission for 6 years and was the sharpest bilateral negotiator I had ever worked with, and who I had been planning to promote for 8 months and kept forgetting to formalize. I formalized it during hour 19. She looked at the promotion document and then at me and said, "Is this really the moment for paperwork?" Chen used to say that the best time for paperwork is when everything else is on fire, I said, because at least the paperwork gets done. Patricia looked at me for a second. She sounds like she was something. She was everything, I said. It was the most I had said about Chen in 18 hours. I had been working. I had been doing exactly what needed to be done in exactly the order it needed doing. I had been Chen's student for 6 years, and the lesson she had worked hardest to teach me was that grief and work are not opposites. They occupy the same space. You do not put one down to pick up the other. You carry both. I was carrying both. At hour 20, I sat in my office with the lights down and drank the glass of water I had poured and not drunk in the briefing room with Rays. I had brought it with me. I do not know why. It was room temperature by now and tasted like nothing in particular. The pen was in my pocket. The conclave was not the same thing it had been 20 hours ago. It was not going to be that thing again. The shattering that had happened was not the dramatic kind. No explosions, no fleet engagement, no species driven from membership. It was the structural kind. The kind you find when you go back later and look at when the cracks appeared and trace them to their origin point. The origin point was a woman talking about transit fees. The origin point was a pen rolling off a table. The origin point was 3 words written in a margin 2 years ago by someone who had understood, with the patience and precision of a person who had spent her life reading the galaxy's currents, that the emergency was coming, and the door needed to be built before it arrived. I turned the lights back on. I opened the next briefing document. There was work to do. 1 year is not a long time. In the conclave's accounting, 1 year is barely a rounding error. 600 years of institutional history, the slow movement of civilizations across centuries. The elder species measure political change in generations, not months. When they say that something is new, they mean it has existed for less than a century. When they say something is recent, they mean within living memory, which for some of them spans 400 years. I was 35 years old. I had been a diplomat for 12. I was the head ambassador of the human mission to the Galactic Conclave, a title that had been created 3 weeks after the Article 9 session, when the UN Council decided that the word acting in front of my current title was doing everyone a disservice. 1 year. It felt like longer. It felt like something compressed, the way time moves when you are inside something that will eventually be called historical, but does not feel historical when you are living it. It feels like paperwork and bilateral meetings and 3 hours of sleep and Owen Graves refilling your coffee without being asked, because he has learned that asking takes too long. I stood in the doorway of my apartment on the Conclave station, a larger one now, which I had not asked for and had been given anyway as part of the mission's upgraded classification, and looked at the dawn light coming through the viewport. The station's artificial cycle ran on a 26-hour clock. The light was orange for the first hour of morning, which I had always found slightly wrong, the wrong shade of orange, not quite what the sky at home looked like, but close enough that on tired days it was almost comforting. I had 12 people coming to the mission today. 5 of them had been with Chen. Patricia Wells, now my deputy chief of mission, was briefing the other 7 on the morning session agenda. Carl Holt had submitted a formal request to remain with the mission indefinitely, which I had approved in the same document as Patricia's promotion, and which he had received without comment, the way Carl received all things. Owen Graves was, as of 2 weeks ago, officially a diplomatic analyst. a title he had been performing for 11 months without the formal designation, and he had responded to receiving it by coming to work early every day for the following 14 days and not mentioning it once. Good people. Chen had built some of them. I had built some of them. We had all built each other in the way teams build each other through the sustained pressure of doing difficult things together. I drank my coffee. I looked at the orange light. I thought about the session this morning, which was a routine plenary, trade routes, transit adjustments, the structural groundwork of the Article 9 transition period, which had now completed its first full quarter. The VET's 3 transit lane reclassifications were generating revenue that was being distributed to 4 junior species in their quadrant. The distribution was being monitored. The monitoring was being handled by a newly formed compact oversight body that had not existed a year ago, and whose membership was drawn from junior species for the first time in conclave history. That oversight body had been Chen's idea. I had found it in her files. A proposal, half-finished, dated 4 months before her death. She had been building toward it in the background of 3 other projects, the way she built toward things quietly, through patient small steps, never announcing the destination until the path was already laid. I had finished the proposal. Patricia had drafted it into formal language. The UN Council had approved it. The conclave had accepted it, not without argument, not without 3 weeks of painful procedural negotiation, but ultimately with the recognition that it was legally structured well enough to be unassailable. It was called the Chen Compact Oversight Body in the internal human documentation, not in the official conclave records. The official records used the formal designation, but among the people who had worked on it and around it, the name had simply settled into use the way names settle when they are right. I put down my coffee and got dressed and went to work. The plenary chamber looked different than it had a year ago. Not physically. The same chamber. The same 47-seat floor configuration, the same gallery above, the same wall displays that had once, on a day I would not forget, shown a fleet in formation around a homeworld without warning. The chamber itself had not changed. The people in it had changed. I noticed it in the way delegations arranged themselves. A year ago, the junior members had sat in the outer ring, the elder species at the center tables, the way it had always been, because the center tables were where power sat and power had always sat there. Now the seating was the same, technically, but the density of communication had shifted. 4 junior species that had co-signed Earth's secondary brief had developed bilateral relationships with each other over the last year that had no precedent in their prior history. They talked to each other before sessions. They shared analysis through channels that had not existed before. They read the compact's provisions with attention, with something that looked, from where I sat, like the beginning of institutional literacy. Something had opened. Chen's door, in her document built before the emergency arrived, had opened something that was now open for other people to walk through. I found my seat. I placed my document on the table. I placed my pen beside it. The VETH delegation was in their seats. Their ambassador was different from the one who had sat in those seats a year ago. That ambassador had resigned 4 months into the Article 9 transition, which the VETH Clan Council had characterized as a voluntary retirement, and which everyone in the conclave understood meant something else entirely. His replacement was older, quieter, and had spent the first month in the role attending every session without speaking at all. He had begun speaking in month 2. He was precise and careful, and had not in 4 months made a single procedural error. In the 3rd seat of the VETH rear delegation row, the young delegate sat with his hands folded. He was not the same person he had been a year ago, not physically, but the fear that had lived in his posture the night he came to my office with an unauthorized apology and a question he did not know how to ask, that was gone. In its place was something steadier. Not confidence exactly, more like the beginning of it, the precursor stage. He had been promoted. I had learned this 3 months ago from a VETH cultural liaison who mentioned it without apparent awareness that I would care, and I had said nothing, and filed it away in the part of my memory that keeps things it is not sure what to do with. He met my eyes when I sat down, the same as he had the first session after everything. He held the look longer this time. Then he made the Veth gesture I had seen him make before, the one that translated approximately as witnessed. I gave him a small nod. He looked away. The session began. Sav Andal, still in the chair, still with the same expression of patient exhaustion, called the plenary to order. Routine session. The agenda was standard. Transit fee adjustments in the outer lanes. 3 bilateral agreements being entered into the record. A report from the new oversight body, presented by its rotating chair. A junior species delegate who had been doing this job for 4 months, and who presented with a precision that I had watched grow over those 4 months from nervous accuracy into genuine authority. I was taking notes. The work of diplomacy at the ground level is mostly note-taking, listening, tracking, understanding which sentence in a 40-sentence speech carries the actual content and which sentences around it are architecture. Chen had been extraordinary at this. The best I had ever seen. She could sit through a 3-hour plenary and identify, afterward, exactly 3 moments that had mattered and explain why each one connected to something 6 months away. I was not as good as she was. I had accepted this. I was working on it. The third agenda item was a proposed revision to the transit fee framework in Sector 12. Routine. I had read the briefing document that morning. I opened the relevant section in my notes. The proposed revision was 22 pages. The preamble was 1 page, which is standard for a framework revision of this type. The preamble acknowledged the existing transit agreements, noted the parties involved, stated the purpose of the revision in formal diplomatic language. The last sentence of the preamble was not in the version I had read that morning. I read it again to be certain. It was still there. 18 words. Formal conclave register, inserted at the end of the preamble after the standard language, in a position that was technically unusual but not procedurally invalid. A sentence that attributed the philosophical foundation of the new transit framework to a source. The source named was Ambassador Delara Chen, Human Mission to the Galactic Conclave. Not formally credited in the body of the document, where credits would be expected. In the preamble. In the opening statement of purpose, in the language that would be read first and referenced always, for as long as this framework existed and was cited and built upon by whoever came after. Her name, in a document that would outlast everyone in this room. I looked up. 23 delegations. The gallery above. Sav Andal at the session chair, reading his own copy of the agenda with his expression of patient exhaustion. No one claimed it, no raised hand, no formal acknowledgement. No one looked at me to see my reaction, which would have been the tell if any single party had coordinated this. They were all simply reading, or appearing to read, or doing what people do in a room when they have jointly decided that something does not require explanation. No one denied it either. I looked at the young Veth delegate in the third rear seat. He was looking at his document. He was not looking at me. His posture was careful and specific, and I spent 2 seconds reading it before I understood what I was seeing. He had known it was coming. It had not been one species. It had not been a coordinated effort in the way that word usually means, with meetings and agreements and formal plans. It had been something slower and quieter than that. The kind of agreement that forms between people who have been changed by the same event and find, when they go back to their separate work, that they have all arrived at the same conclusion from different directions. Delara Chen had changed this room. She had changed it while she was alive, through 23 years of work, and she had changed it again after, through the emergency she had prepared for and the door she had left open. The people in this room, some of them, not all, but some, enough, had arrived at the quiet collective understanding that the record should say so. And so the record said so. I set my pen down on the table. Not to the side, the way I usually set it when I was reading closely. Not in my pocket, the way I had been carrying it for a year. Down on the table, flat still. A deliberate placement. The kind you make when you are not doing it for any reason you can immediately name, but your hands know something your mind is catching up to. I had carried that pen since the day it rolled off the edge of the table and hit the floor with a small, sharp click. I had carried it through briefings and bilateral meetings, and the long overnight hours when the conclave was quiet, and I was drafting language that would, in the way these things work, shape the lives of species that had no idea a human diplomat was thinking about them at 3 in the morning. I had carried it through Chen's files and Article 9, and the 20 hours after and the year of structural work that followed. I had not carried it consciously. I had not decided to carry it. It had been in my pocket and I had reached for it and it had been there, and that had been enough. Enough to keep the hands busy. Enough to have something to hold in a room that had taken something from me and not given it back. Her name was in the document. It was going to be in every document that cited this one. Every framework built on this framework. Every transit fee revision and oversight report and bilateral agreement that traced its legal lineage back to this preamble. Her name would be in the invisible architecture of conclave law for as long as the conclave existed, which, given its track record, meant for a very long time. She was a woman who had planned 12 moves ahead, who had written 3 words in a margin and filed them under emergency, who had taught me that even is more dangerous than cold and that grief and work occupy the same space, and that the best time for paperwork is when everything else is on fire. She was gone. She was not here. She would not come back, and no provision of any document could change that, and I was not confused about that. But she was also unambiguously present. In the room, in the framework, in the 4 junior species who were talking to each other before sessions in ways they had not talked before. In Patricia Wells drafting language with the precision of someone who had watched a master do it and internalized the method. In Owen Graves refilling coffee and reading briefings and growing, month by month, into the thing he was going to become. In Carl Holt standing outside a door with the steady attention of someone who has decided that the thing he is protecting is worth protecting. In the young Veth delegate with his hands folded and his posture steady, and the gesture he had given me across a room full of people who did not know what it meant. In the pen on the table, I looked at it for a moment, the ordinary object, slightly scuffed where it had hit the floor, a standard diplomatic stylus, blue, with the human mission insignia on the clip, the kind of thing that sat in supply cabinets in bulk and was handed out to new staff on their first day without ceremony. She had not given it to me. It had been mine already, but it had rolled off the table the same moment she had stopped speaking, and I had picked it up and I had carried it, and now it was here. I looked at her name in the document. I thought, there you are. Just that, no more. The thought arrived and sat in its own space, and I let it sit. I did not elaborate on it, and I did not push it away. I was 35 years old, and I had lost the person who had taught me the most important things I knew, and the loss was the same size it had been a year ago. It was not smaller. Loss does not get smaller. It gets more familiar. You learn to carry it the way you learn to carry a pen, without always knowing you are doing it. The session chair called the next agenda item, Transit Adjustment, Outer Lane Corridor. Patricia was handling this one. I watched her stand up and present with the quiet precision I had watched develop over 12 months, and I thought about Chen watching me in my first year, and I thought about time moving forward in the way it does. Accumulating, building, one good day of work at a time into something that eventually has weight and shape and name. I picked up the pen, put it back in my pocket. Sav Andal was making a notation. Patricia was responding to a question from the Kethori delegation with the exact right amount of technical specificity, and not a word more. Owen Graves was at the back of the room with a datapad, tracking the session record in real time. Carl Holt was at the door. The conclave turned on its ancient axis. The elder species and the junior species and the species that had been here for 600 years, and the ones who had been here for 40 and would be here for 600 more, all of them in the same room, all of them working on the same vast, complicated, endless project of coexisting in a galaxy that was large enough for all of them, and occasionally forgot that it was. The document with Chen's name in the preamble sat in the session record. It would sit there tomorrow, and next year, and for a very long time after that. I opened my notes. The next item was a proposed adjustment to the Sector 8 Oversight Framework, third quarter review, 7 pages. I had read it this morning. I had questions about paragraph 4. I wrote them down. There was work to do. There was always work to do. She had told me that first. She had said it the way you say things that are both obvious and important, as if the work itself is not separate from the meaning of it but the same thing, the very same thing, and the doing of it is the only answer that has ever mattered to any question worth asking. I wrote it down. I kept working,